Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be here with you at Stanborough Park Church, and thank you very much to Pastor Jacques for the invitation. One of the most important message or lessons to be learned in life is that each one of us is deeply, deeply loved. But depending on the circumstances of our lives, the family of origin, or just things beyond our control, it's not always easy and the message doesn't get through. So let's pick up the story that Gerald already read for us. And let's pick it up a little bit earlier in 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4, where the main character is introduced for us for the first time. 2 Samuel chapter 4 and verse 4. It says, Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but as she hurried to leave, he fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth. So here's a little bit of background you need to know in order to understand the story. Mephibosheth's father was Jonathan. He is an apparent heir to the throne because his father, Saul, is the first king of Israel. But when Jonathan and Saul go into a battle to fight the Philistines, Mephibosheth is at home with his nanny, and the news comes that both Jonathan and Saul have been killed in the battle. When she hears this, she immediately picks the little boy up and takes off, trying to run away, because she knows very well that in ancient world, when a king died, and there is no immediate person in the near family to assume the throne, a new person from outside the family will try to do that, and in the process, all people from the previous family are in mortal danger. So she tries to save the boy from terrible, sad fate and run away with him. A new person would seek out and kill every member of the former royal family to make sure there was nobody alive who had more valid claim to the throne than he did. And so the nanny knows that this 5-year-old boy in her care is in mortal peril. She scoops him, she begins to run, but in the process, Mephibosheth falls. Now, we don't know exactly what happened. All we know is that as a result, he became disabled in both feet. For the rest of his life, he's going to be handicapped. They did not have the same advances in medical science in those days that we have today, but we still have no idea whether if he had access to the modern medical care, if that would make any difference. The reality is, Mephibosheth is going to be marked by this major injury that happened to him when he was 5 years old. But some good people take care of him and find a safe place for this little boy, and they go away from the center of the action and where everything is going on, and they hide in a small, insignificant village called Lo-Debar. Now, Lo-Debar in Hebrew means the little one. This is a place in the middle of nowhere. No one ever heard about it, and he is hidden there. Meanwhile, David assumes the throne of Israel, and he starts off strong. He is doing extremely well. He makes sure there is no one who could pretend to the throne that is left alive, all the surrounding nations that could have interest in subjecting Israel to their rule are also defeated. If you can imagine, if there was something like to-do list for an Asian Near Eastern king, David is ticking off all the boxes faster than you can imagine. He's storming enemy forts, he's expanding the national boundaries, he's vanquishing his enemies. Yes, vanquishing is the word that properly describes what the king was doing. Now, I don't know about you, but I grew up somehow with this impression, that if people like Abraham or David were alive today, we would immediately have someone to be the elder in our church. These noble characters. But if you read 2 Samuel 23, towards the end of his life, gives the list of his heroes, you notice that the main heroes of David were not people who had an evangelistic campaign and then baptized 300 souls. No. They're people who cut off 300 heads. Okay? They mention a guy who was chopping off heads with his sword so eagerly the whole day that in the evening he had spasm in his hand, so he could not let the sword go off, and he went to bed with his sword because he was chopping off heads all the day long. Of course, David is scared of this enterprise, so every time he's supposed to go into the war, he asks the Lord, looking in the mirror in the morning, will this head be on top of my shoulders in the evening? Should I go out? Will I come back safe? And when he gets the positive nod from the Lord, he goes out into a war. Interestingly enough, when he needs to bring in another wife into his harem, he doesn't ask the Lord, do I have already enough? Do I need a new one? But this is the type of man he is. And then we'll pick up the story in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1. One day, David stops what he is doing, pursuing his enemies, killing people left and right. And suddenly he remembers his dear friend Jonathan. And David that morning in chapter 9, verse 1, asked a very important question. 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1. Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I could show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Wow. You see, David and Jonathan were closest friends. They loved each other very much. But when Jonathan died, the elders of Israel, come to David and said, we have heard that Samuel anointed you the king. We have seen you defeating the Goliath and what you have done over the years. First in Hebron, the southern kingdom, Judah, want him to become the king, and later the northern kingdom also. And so he becomes the king over all of Israel. But one day, he stops and he asks the question, to whom can I show kindness? Instead of pursuing his enemies, asking, how can I show my strength? What will benefit my country? How can I solidify my position? He asks the question, is there somebody I can be nice to? Is there somebody I can give something to? And it's a very peculiar thing, because it's an important question, not only for David to ask, but for each one of us. To whom can I show kindness? To whom can I be nice today? And so David asked this question, and of course his servants immediately try to find out, okay, is there anybody left from the family of Saul, from the family of Jonathan? And finally they find this man, Ziba, from the family of Saul, and he knows, and so they bring him to David. And in verse 3 we read, And notice what he says. Ziba says this to David. There is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame on his both feet. Notice, he does not give the name of Mephibosheth. He only gives the name of the father. And he immediately adds, but don't worry, he's no threat to you. You don't need to be afraid of this guy. There's no chance that he could become the king of Israel because he is lame on both feet. And you and I learned the first lesson from the story. We don't always have control over things that happen to us, that people remember us by, over things that become piece of our identity. Mephibosheth was 5 years old when the news comes. Nanny meant well. She tried to save his life. And the rest is history. He's never going to be able to walk on his own. And without recourse to good medical care and social system, he lives on goodwill of some people who shelter him and hide him in the insignificant place in the middle of nowhere. That's what determines his identity. There's a lawyer in America who became a very famous or infamous for something I'm quite certain he would rather not to be known for. As I said, he's a J.D., Doctor of Law, from the state of Indiana, and in 1976 he was elected to the House of Representatives, the American Congress, their version of the parliament. And after 2 years he decided to run again, and this time he won by the largest margin victory to this day in the state of Indiana for his congressional district. The first time he won the place, he defeated someone who has been there for 8 terms. Yet he got the place. And the second time, he got the largest margin of victory until today. And then after 2 more years in the Congress, he decided that he would like to be a senator. So he defeated the incumbent senator for the state of Indiana and became a senator. He won again. And 4 years later, he decided that he wants to run again, and this time, in 1980, he was elected senator by the largest margin of victory anybody has ever been elected to the Senate from the state of Indiana, and at age of 33, he was the youngest senator ever from Indiana. And then, after 2 terms of service in the US Senate, he became the 44th Vice President of the United States of America. I would say a rather impressive resume. Unfortunately, in June 1992, Dan Quayle went to a school, elementary school, to be a judge of the spelling contest. And he is not remembered anymore as a successful congressman or senator or vice president. But when the young boy was asked to spell the word potato, and he spelled it correctly, Dan Quayle corrected him and told him that it should be spelled with potato, T-O-E, in the end. And even today, if you go on Google and write Dan Q, the first thing that comes on is Dan Quayle's potato. You see, don't always have control over things that people remember us by. Certain things can assign a piece of our identity without us contributing much to it. The same is true for Mephibosheth. When Ziba comes before David, he doesn't even mention his name. He just says, don't worry, he's no threat to you. He's lame on both feet. That's a pretty hard thing to have assigned as your identity in this world. I don't know how many of you have experienced something similar. Maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's a friend or a child, maybe it's you, maybe it's something that happened to you a long time ago. We have tendency to push away and ostracize those who are different from us, and can be sometimes quite cruel to people just because of something that happened some time ago. And it sticks to them, and it becomes part of their identity, who they are, and there's nothing you can do to take it off. When Ziba gives the report to David, the only thing that he mentions about Mephibosheth is he's lame in both feet. He's defined by his handicap. Fortunately, David is not at all deterred by this very poor introduction and asks Mephibosheth to be brought into his royal palace. Now imagine the shock that Mephibosheth goes through in his life. When the when the limousines stop in Lo-Debar, another comes, and government limousine to pick him up, and he knows the cover is blown. All his life he was told, there is an evil king in Jerusalem. He can never know who you are, your true identity, because if he learns who you are, that's it, you are dead. And the security agents come and pick him up and escort him to Jerusalem, and then he appears before David. And we'll pick up the story in verse 6. And when Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to him to pay honor. And David said, Mephibosheth, at your service, he replied. Don't be afraid, David said to him. Shall we stop it there? Now, why David is saying to him, don't be afraid? Of course, you know, Mephibosheth lived all his life from the time he was 5 on in hiding. Who is he hiding from? He's hiding from David. Everybody in his surrounding family, in the family that took care of him, is telling him, David is the bad guy. David is after you. We need to make sure that he doesn't know that you exist, that you survived. And suddenly David invites him to his palace, and when he opens his mouth and knows his name, Mephibosheth, he says, don't be afraid. It's the day when all his worst nightmares came true. Imagine him either limping or being carried into the palace, up the stairs, surrounded by soldiers and guards, trembling, terrified, and he knows now it's coming. Now he's going to learn his fate. But David says, don't be afraid. Now Mephibosheth knows that when Saul, his grandfather, tried to kill David and threw the spear at him, David ran away. For Mephibosheth, that is not an option. He is not going to run away. Mephibosheth knows all too well that running away is not an option for him. He is brought into this palace in a vulnerable, frightened state, expecting death. Instead, he hears verse 7, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul. And then he adds, and you will always eat at my table. And this is what David says to him. Don't be afraid. I am going to be nice to you. I am going to treat you kindly. And he says to this man who lived his entire life in poverty and exile, depending on kindness of strange people, I am going to return all that belonged to your grandfather to you. You see, because of his injuries, Mephibosheth was never able to work to support himself. His entire life he lived dependent on other people who took care of him and who have been nice to him. But David promises him land and property that will produce income for Mephibosheth for the rest of his life. In other words, he says to him, cheer up, you are a millionaire. And then he adds something even more significant. And you are always going to eat at my table. Now, for us living in 21st century England, this might not be significant. But if you understand the Middle Eastern mentality, eating for people in Middle East, in Near East, is a really big deal. Sometimes it's easy to overlook the enormity of what David does for Mephibosheth. Because when he says, you are going to be eating with my sons, this is an act of adoption. I am going to treat you like one of my sons. And if you read the chapter on, later in the chapter, it actually says that Mephibosheth ate at the table of David, always sitting with his sons. So, Mephibosheth is an orphan, and at this moment he not only becomes a millionaire, not only he's granted property and wealth and income for the rest of his life, but he becomes the son of the reigning king. For the first time since he was 5 years old, Mephibosheth is being welcomed into a family. He has truly gone from famine to feast, from an orphan to the household of the king. So obviously, this is a big deal. You would expect that at this moment Mephibosheth is going to celebrate, to clap, to be happy and to rejoice. It's an amazing moment that you expect that he is going to be over the top about it. He would respond similar to how you might respond if somebody knocked on your door and there was a big crew of people from the postcode lottery with a check the size of a minivan and your name on it. Right? This is a big deal. The guy has just become a millionaire. But look at the verse 8. The last verse that Gerald read for us. Now, you don't actually, in our egalitarian society, don't expect that Mephibosheth is going to high-five the king in those days, but his response, listen to this. Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" He said, "Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. But why are you doing this to me?" Now, in order to understand, the dead dog has fallen out of favor as an insult in this part of the world. But you need to understand that among the Israelites, dogs were not the beloved household pets. They were considered unclean animals. They were half wild, half starving scavengers that prowled the city by night. The dogs lived on refuse of the streets and the carcasses of the flock that has been torn by wild animals and therefore unfit for human consumption. And when Jezebel was thrown out of the window, you read what these wild, half-wild, starving dogs did to her body. So Israelites hated, despised the dogs. They felt the same about a contact with someone that was dead. A dead person would make you impure. And so when Mephibosheth says, "How come that you remembered that you have noticed a dead dog like me?" He's in this joyous moment, the greatest moment of his life, he is describing himself with a double curse. Why would he do that at this point of his life? And here's the second lesson from this story. Remember what was the first lesson, by the way? Remember, you are supposed to learn something. If you don't, I'm not doing a good job. We can't always influence how people remember us or things that become part of our identity. We lived in a world which is not fair, and bad things happen to all the people. Okay, the second lesson. The problem of Mephibosheth is not only his lame feet. The problem goes much deeper. The problem is inside of him. For his entire life, he has heard people speak about him the way he was introduced to David. But don't worry, this guy is lame on both feet. That's his identity. And it has got inside him. He believes it himself. It happened for so long that he started to believe that those people are right when they define him by his circumstances, by his injuries, by his disability. He believes there is nothing good beyond him, that it cannot be overcome. Mephibosheth came to believe that because of his legs, because of his feet, he is worthless. He is not even deserving a good gift. And if I am honest, this is a problem that is not confined to Mephibosheth only. Every one of us has the capacity to lose track of the value that each one of us has. You see, Mephibosheth somehow forgot that he was a son or grandson of a king. And in the same way, you and I can easily forget that we are daughters and sons, not just a king, but sons and daughters of the King of Kings, the creator of the universe. Mephibosheth cannot bring himself to accept graciously this enormous gift because he can't believe that someone could find him worthy of it. No. I can't understand why you would do this to me. Many of you have things in your life that have been stolen from your understanding of yourself as the beloved and deserving child of God. Many of you are paralyzed by anxiety. Many of you are thinking that you are too heavy, too skinny, not attractive enough. Many of you believe that you are only as good as you look. Many of you feel that you are not smart enough, not funny enough, not successful enough. Many of us feel that the sins of our past are just too big, too ugly for God to want to bring you into his own family, into his presence. Maybe you feel like that and you don't know what to do with it. Many of us feel racked with this feeling that we are just not good enough, that things did not work out in our lives, in our spiritual lives, or in some other aspect of our life to that extent that God could be nice and gracious to us. And I can feel that like I am just getting by, or if I am faking it, that if you all knew the real me, you would not like what you found there. I am sure some of you can relate to that. You see, when I read this story, my heart breaks for Mephibosheth. He has been so long divided and separated from love and acceptance that he cannot imagine love and acceptance himself. He has given up his hope, and this is a devastating thing for him. But you know what's the good news? The hope finds him nevertheless. Because David just does everything he has promised. Can you imagine? Poor little lonely lame Mephibosheth looks around, and for the first time in his life, he has a genuine home. For the first time in his life, he sees, I have a family. For the first time in his life, he has a bright future. For the first time in his life, he has genuine hope. Now, some things change, some things don't. He'll still be lame, but the quality of his life is going to be different because of how he's going to view himself. And here it is where it gets a little bit personal. What David did for Mephibosheth, God is doing for you and me. Jesus came to this earth, and in John 10:10 he said, I haven't come just that they can have life. He came and said, I have come so that you can have life abundantly. Why would he do that? Because a long time ago, God of the universe looked around and asked the most intriguing question. To whom can I show kindness? To whom can I be nice? And he looked down and he saw you and you and you and you and you. And he saw me and he saw every one of us. And decided to show kindness so that you and I see ourselves in a new light. And so there is hope for each one of you, each one of us. There is hope for us today if you came feeling lonely. There's hope for you today if the joy of your life has been hijacked by anxiety. There's hope for you if you are feeling you are just too far away from God. There's hope for each one of us, even if you feel you are not smart enough and capable enough or successful enough or holy enough, sanctified enough, whatever it is, there is hope for each one of us. Because the third lesson of the story is whatever David did for Mephibosheth, God did for you and me, for each one of us. Please hear this. No matter what happened up till now in your life, no matter what you have done or what has been done to you, no matter what you have said or has been said about you, this is how the God of the universe feels about you. When David looked at Mephibosheth, he did not see in front of him a handicapped beggar. He looked at him and said, this is Jonathan's boy. He loved him the way Mephibosheth never imagined he could be loved. God of the universe is looking at you and says, you are my beloved child. You are my beloved son. You are my beloved daughter. God loves each one of us more than we are capable of comprehending. Now, there is this lesson. In order for Mephibosheth to become rich, somebody had to give those vineyards and lands and fields to him. David was the king of Israel, but he did not consider the privilege of his position as something to be used to his own advantage. Instead, he stopped in what he was doing, looked around and said, who can I be nice to? Who can I be kind to? And he found Mephibosheth and offered him this unimaginably grand gift. For Mephibosheth to become rich, somebody had to lose them. And that person was David. Now you can argue he still had enough, yes, but still, kings generally don't do these things. If you look at Philippians 2 verses 6 to 8, it says, Jesus Christ did not consider the privilege of his place in heaven as something to be taken advantage of. Did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of servant, by becoming obedient to death, even the death on the cross. The King of the universe made himself significantly poorer so that each one of us can become richer. So, what are the lessons from this story? First, come on guys, the lunch is waiting. You can't always influence things that happen in your life or how people remember you, what becomes part of your identity. What was the second? The problem of Mephibosheth goes deeper than lame feet. It goes inside his soul. Third, you are Mephibosheth. What David did to Mephibosheth, God did for you. And here's the last one. You are not only Mephibosheth, you are also David. In those coming days and weeks, you and I have the privilege, because of what God did for us, to wake up on Sunday morning or even Sabbath afternoon and ask the question, is there somebody I can be nice to? To whom can I show kindness today? Because God has been so good and nice to me. We are not only Mephibosheth people, we are also like David. And the Holy Spirit is prompting your heart to stop what you are doing, pause in your busyness, look around the people in your life, in your circle of influence, and ask the most uncommon question, to whom can I show kindness? Imagine if a military hero who was killing people left and right can wake up one day and say, what if I made somebody happy today? Today I am not going to cut off any heads. Today I am going to be nice. If he can do it, you and I can do it too. If you need to hear this message again, make a laminated card which says, I am the beloved child of God. You can go out today knowing that you are the beloved child of God, that you have a Father in heaven that takes great pride and delight in you. But you can also know, I can be David for somebody else this coming week.